Okay, so session 1 is the argument for God from creation and design. And I was going to open with what's man's ultimate quest, and then the argument for there being a creator, and then the argument for there being a designer. And I borrowed a lot of material from Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, a guy called Vince Vitale, who has a great DVD here, called Evidence for God, if anybody wants to borrow it or get a copy of this. This is in PAL format, unfortunately, so it works in England, and it works probably in your laptop, but it may not work in your DVD player unless you have a multi-region one. And we have other references. Frank Turek, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, Reasonable Faith with William Lane Craig, and that's about it. Yeah. Okay. So what is man's ultimate quest? What do we see as man's ultimate quest? Well, we all want significance, comfort, happiness, right? What do you want? What do most people want? They want comfort. They want to get what they want when they want it, and they don't want to be challenged on what they decide. They want to be happy. But even with these things, if we get everything that we want, we can see that life still can feel fairly empty. And if you look at Ecclesiastes 2, verses 10 and 11, there's these two verses from King Solomon. He says, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all of my labor. And this was the reward for my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. So this is very interesting, that we can climb the ladder, right? Corporate success or whatever it is, the rat race, and we can win like Solomon did, the richest man that ever lived, really successful, sparing himself no pleasure at all, and still find things are empty, So what really is our quest? What should make us the most happy? So we look a bit deeper. I think people really need to know truth. They yearn to know what's really true. Not just what somebody says is true, but what's ultimately true. And also we want to live for a transcendent cause, something that's bigger than ourselves. Because otherwise it really does seem vain. As Solomon said, you can have everything and then you die and you give it all up, right? So what is something bigger than ourselves, a legacy or a transcendent cause? And John 8:12 says, Jesus spoke to them again saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. John 1:4, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. And John 10:10, I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. So there's a promise in Christ that we have more than just what's here now. We can have life to the full, we can have light and life in Christ, and we'll not be walking in darkness or in vain hopes. So I would hope that we'll get there. Okay, so just have a quick look at these pictures. This is the Helix Nebula from courtesy of NASA from the Space Hubble Telescope. Space Telescope, Cat's Eye Nebula, the Lagoon Nebula. This is from Hubble. And this is a red supergiant, Monocerotis. Now when you look at these pictures, what do you see? If you were Richard Dawkins, famous atheist, you could say, oops, it's going forward, sorry. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Or you might say, Psalm 19:1 and 2, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. So it's really a perspective thing. How would you see these astronomical beings? So does science preclude the need for God? You hear this often, People used to believe that God was the cause of shooting stars, but now we know what shooting stars are. They're just meteorites burning up, or lightning, or thunder. So, well, now we understand with science, there's no need for God, you know. He's been used up, right? God's kind of dead now. He's redundant. But I would say that's not a sound argument, because if you see, historically people used to say that lunacy was related to the full moon, right? Every time there was a full moon, they'd say that would cause people to become lunatics. But now we know it's not related to the lunar calendar. But do we say that you shouldn't believe in the moon? Not at all, right? It's not like A plus B equals C. It's just because we don't ascribe lightning to God, it doesn't mean God doesn't exist. Okay, so there's a cultural myth around us that science and faith are at odds with each other. A guy called Peter van Inwagen, he's a professor of philosophy at Notre Dame. He says, no discovery of science, so far at any rate, has the least tendency to show that there is no God. And so I'd say science isn't compatible with a belief in God, but points strongly towards the existence of God for 4 reasons. The universe has a beginning, the universe is knowable, it's regular, and it looks finely tuned for life. And so these 4 facts kind of point towards the fact that God is the best explanation for the existence of the universe. Okay, so the first point here is the Kalam cosmological argument, and this is 2 premises and then a third preposition, which is whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, proposition. Thirdly, therefore the universe has a cause. Okay, so whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Okay, so whatever begins to exist has a cause. We know that everything that exists has a cause. Things don't appear or just start happening without a cause. You don't kind of think I'll just wait to eat tonight and I'll hope that some pizza appears in my house, you know. You phone up and order one, right? You cause it to happen. And you're not afraid here that there's going to be a Bengal tiger coming in the back and attacking us, right? Because things don't just appear randomly around us. And things don't pop into existence or vanish randomly. Nothing happens without a cause. And even David Hume, the great skeptic, wrote in his letter of 1754, "But allow me to tell you, I've never asserted so absurd a proposition as that anything might arise without a cause." So he's an atheist, but he understands that things don't happen without causes. Okay. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. So there was a historic view that the universe was infinitely old and has always existed, and that's just the way it is. It's the state of things. And then out of the universe that was there, then we evolved or whatever, right? Or that God created. But the idea that the universe is infinitely old and never had a beginning is unreasonable. If the universe, why should the universe be exempt from causality, firstly? Why should something that we see running down with time, right? The universe is generally running out of energy, usable energy. Why should it be exempt from causality? If it's infinitely old, then we would have never actually arrived at the present time, if you think about it. If it never had a beginning, it was infinitely old. How did we get to now? And actually infinity is just a mathematical concept which you can't really sensibly apply to physical things. There was a guy called Hilbert, a German mathematician, that tried to apply this in a talk about a grand hotel. He said if this grand hotel has an infinite number of rooms and it's fully occupied, and then somebody arrives at the door and wants a room, the manager just needs to say, well, we'll get the people in room 1 to go into room 2, and the ones in room 2 to go into room 3, all the way up the chain, and there'll be a space in room 1, and then we can accommodate them. In fact, any finite number of people might show up at the hotel, and we can do that again and again and again and accommodate all those number of people, even though it was full. Or let's say we get all the people in, let's say an infinite number of people show up at this hotel. We can get all the people in room 1 to go to room 2, and all the ones in room 2 to go to room 4, and they just double their room number. And now we have every other room free, so we can still accommodate an infinite number of people in this hotel. So the idea of an infinite number of things, which is in an actual physical thing, is just not sensible. It's a mathematical calculation, and infinity is something divided by 0 or whatever, but in reality it just doesn't work. So another reason that the scientists believe that the universe isn't infinitely old is, and they believe in the Big Bang, is the surge. So I'll go through this. Now, this is an old Earth creationist model, and there are a lot of people maybe that would believe in a young Earth creationist model, and they're not mutually exclusive for this argument, right? The fact is that the universe has a finite beginning to it. So, so you can remember these, this acronym SURGE, which is the second law of thermodynamics, the universal expansion rate, the radiation afterglow, the great galaxy seeds, and Einstein's theory of relativity. So the second law of thermodynamics says that as things expand and as they increase with time, they increase in entropy. And as things increase in entropy, the amount of usable energy in the universe is getting used up. And it never goes backwards. So the first law of thermodynamics is that the energy is conserved in a closed system. But the universe isn't necessarily a closed system, it's expanding. And it seems that the universal expansion rate is actually getting faster. So we're going to go to a certain heat death. Now, if the universe was infinitely old, then it would have already burned out. It would be like having a cup of coffee that I left there from this morning and now it's stone cold. It's reached equilibrium with the rest of the room temperature. So the universe can't be infinitely old. Otherwise it would have already burned up, right? So just from the second law of thermodynamics, we must say it must have had a finite beginning, and it's still getting older, but it's not used up its energy yet. Then there's the universal expansion rate, which they've mapped now to say that actually it's accelerating. So it was decelerating, now it's accelerating, and that's quite modelable. And there's a graph, I think, on the next screen of that. Let's see here. So after the Big Bang, there was a very large expansion very quickly, and then it slowed right down. And this gives time for the galaxies to form and for the higher elements like fluorine and neon and those things to form. And now it's starting to accelerate again because of the amount of dark matter in the universe. So approximately 13.77 billion years old, according to Wikipedia and modern scientists. And not everybody agrees with that, but the universal expansion rate has also been measured. Approximately the way they do it is by looking at the redshift. So if you can, it's not coming out very clearly here, but if you look at a spectrum of a planet through a telescope with spectroscopy, you can see certain lines. So this would be like the sodium line, and there's a hydrogen beta line, and they have very specific wavelengths of light that they would, Fraunhofer lines they're called. And if something's moving away from you, those get shifted towards the red end slightly. So you can see this galaxy, if this was the spectrum of a galaxy, is actually moving away from us, whereas this might be one that's stationary. So from the distance, the speed that things are moving away, you can see, well, they will have been traveling for so far, and then they'll be such a distance away. So there's also the radiation afterglow. So if I go back to this picture here, as you look in a telescope further and further away, you're looking back and back in time, and you can still see this microwave radiation from the background. This was discovered by Penzias and Wilson in New Jersey, I believe. Let's see. I have some notes here. Excuse me a minute. Yeah. Yeah, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, 1964. They were radio astronomers at Bell Labs in New Jersey, and they were doing radio telescope work in the dark sky, and they said, we're getting a lot of interference at a certain wavelength, and we're not really sure why. And they tuned it, and they said, yeah, this is really there. There's like a background microwave radiation. We're not really sure what it is. And then they expressed it to the rest of the scientific community, and they said, this looks like the noise from the Big Bang. That's actually what you're seeing, is the radiation afterglow from the Big Bang. You're seeing the smoking gun from when the Big Bang happened. Okay. There was also the Great Galaxy Seeds. So this was a team at Lawrence Berkeley Labs led by George Smoot, an astrophysicist, and he said, let's track the movement of galaxies. And so they did that, and then they said, if we rewind the film, actually everything comes together to a single point. And these are the Great Galaxy Seeds. There's also remnants of the Big Bang there as well. So they're seeing these Great Galaxy Seeds. And then lastly, Einstein's theory of relativity. So this is a set of differential equations which tie together space, matter, energy, and time. And they've modeled like gravitational fields around planets and things, and they've mapped out what they call the space-time continuum around certain bodies in our solar system so far. And they're saying that it actually calculates pretty accurately to like 5 decimal places correctly. So this idea that space, time, matter, and energy all came into existence at one time, which would be the Big Bang. It's a subset, really, of Einstein's theory of relativity, the Big Bang theory. So there's a lot of agreement in the scientific community that the universe is old. Not everybody in the Christian world believes that, but it has a finite starting point. So here's Stephen Hawking. As you know, he was a Lucasian professor from Cambridge, and he says all evidence seems to indicate that the universe has not existed forever, but that it has had a beginning about 15 billion years ago. Okay, so premise 3, the universe has a cause. So option 1 is someone created the universe. Or option 2 is that the universe just banged into existence from nothing and by nothing. Right? So I don't know what seems more reasonable to you, but as a Christian, or as a theist, or even just as a deist, if you want to take it as extreme as you can, you'd believe that everything came into existence from nothing by someone or something. Or as an atheist, you'd say everything came into existence from nothing and by nothing. And so it seems to be less reasonable to believe that it came from nothing and by nothing. Some atheists have come up with this theory of a multiverse, and well, maybe there's a machine that's just popping out these universes, and it just keeps on happening. But it seems unfounded, There's no evidence that it's untestable. There's no. It's pretty just supposition,
No mold hanging around.
There's no mold, right. Even if the universe banged out from a previously imploding universe, some people would say, well, maybe the universe existed and then it imploded and then it re-exploded again, like a bouncing ball kind of thing. Oh, fair enough. But who dropped the ball in the first place? It's got to be started from something, It didn't start on its own. So even if you go for the bouncing ball or the imploding universe, you still have to have something starting the chain of events. And the multiverse doesn't really solve that. So what would the cause have to be like? It would have to be outside of space and time, right? Because it created space and time. It would have to be immaterial. It can't be made out of any matter because the universe was created at that time, at this Big Bang or this singularity. It'd have to be very powerful. It'd have to be intelligent. It'd have to be pretty creative. And these attributes, without even opening a Bible, these point you towards what the biblical God describes. Somebody outside of space and time can predict with prophecy, knows the beginning from the end, is the beginning and the end. He's immaterial. He's not subject to decay like matter. He's not subject to the second law of thermodynamics. He's highly powerful, highly intelligent, highly creative. Thomas Aquinas said, "Therefore some being exists of its own necessity and does not receive its existence from another being, but rather causes them. This all men speak of as God." So this is in Aquinas' 5 ways. That's his third way. So Vince Vitale said he was talking to he's an apologist. He said he was talking to a professor that was an atheist, and he was telling him, well, how can you not believe in God? I mean, the evidence is all around us. And the guy went off on a diatribe, and he said, and nor do I believe in a virgin birth. As if to say, how ridiculous is that? How can you Christians even propose a virgin birth? And so, is it so utterly absurd to suggest such a thing? But on atheism, this is a famous atheist philosopher, Quentin Smith, says the most reasonable belief to him is that we have come from nothing, by nothing, and for nothing. Right? We've come from nothing, by nothing, and for nothing. That pretty much sounds like a virgin birth. I mean, either you believe in the virgin birth with Mary, or you believe in the virgin birth of the universe anyway. And he also believes in life coming from non-life, or molecules self-replicating in a primeval soup. I mean, there's a lot of virgin births going on, right? So, yeah, these all kind of amount to having a good degree of faith. And as Frank Turek says, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, because it takes a big step of faith if you're going to believe that. So the universe is designed for life. This is the second point. And here's a video, so you don't have to listen to me for another 10 minutes. Hopefully it'll work.
From galaxies and stars, down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would, again, be life-prohibiting. Or, another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he's hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely. What is the best explanation for this astounding phenomenon? There are 3 live options. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Which of these options is the most plausible? According to this alternative, the universe must be life-permitting. The precise values of these constants and quantities could not be otherwise. But is this plausible? Is a life-prohibiting universe impossible? Far from it. It's not only possible, it's far more likely than a life-permitting universe. The constants and quantities are not determined by the laws of nature. There's no reason or evidence to suggest that fine-tuning is necessary. How about chance? Did we just get really, 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 really lucky? No. The probabilities involved are so ridiculously remote as to put the fine-tuning well beyond the reach of chance. So, in an effort to keep this option alive, some have gone beyond empirical science and opted for a more speculative approach, known as the multiverse. They imagine a universe generator that cranks out such a vast number of universes that, odds are, life-permitting universes will eventually pop out. However, there's no scientific evidence for the existence of this multiverse. It cannot be detected, observed, measured, or proved. And the universe generator itself would require an enormous amount of fine-tuning. Furthermore, small patches of order are far more probable than big ones. So the most probable observable universe would be a small one, inhabited by a single, simple observer. But what we actually observe is the very thing that we should least expect: a vast, spectacularly complex, highly ordered universe, inhabited by billions of other observers. So even if the multiverse existed, which is a moot point, it wouldn't do anything to explain the fine-tuning. Given the implausibility of physical necessity or chance, the best explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned for life may very well be it was designed that way. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a superintellect monkeyed with physics, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge.
Seem reasonable.
Seems, So the universe is designed for life. Now let's say I was playing cards with Jim here, and
He'd win.
Jim would win probably. But if he were to get out his cards and he were to throw down a royal flush, and then he threw down another royal flush the next game, and he threw down another royal flush, I would get pretty What would you think if he did this 12 times in a row? What would you think is going on?
He's cheating.
He's cheating, right? Yeah. No, he's just a really good player.
Well, you don't know how to do it.
No, he would definitely be cheating. Or somebody's messing with the cards or something. It's impossible to be dealt that many good hands, one after the other after the other. And so this is what we see with the universe. It's not that it's a little bit fine-tuned. It's crazily fine-tuned in terms of the position of our planet in the solar system, in the way of those cosmological constants, and there's a whole host of other fine-tuning arguments that we could go through. But this is a pretty clear example that there must be a designer of some sort, I would say. So that you heard the argument about the multiverse theory. I was going to skip that bit, but as soon as they did it, I left it on. So where are we? The scientific evidence from the argument from creation of and the fine-tuning of the universe, I would say, would actually point towards the existence of God, not away from him. I think it's fairly clear that that's the case. And people often decide whether they want to believe in God or not from an emotional perspective, right? If you have to believe in a God, well, then maybe there's an obligation associated with that. And do they really want to do that? So it's uncomfortable, right? But if it's truth, it's worth looking at. It's worth listening, and it's worth digging deeper. Now, I think if you ask anybody if they've ever had an experience that thinks that maybe God exists, usually people, they say, I'm not sure. And they go quiet. And then they say, well, actually, there was this time. And they tell you a story, and it's got God's signature all over it, And then when you ask somebody else, and they'll do the same thing. And if they don't want to share it with anybody, so they think they sound silly, right? But if we all shared our stories of things that have happened to us that maybe make us think that God exists, then I think there'd be a lot more Christians, or a lot more theists anyway, because his signature is over a lot of our circumstances. I was going to describe one or two from my life. So there was a time I was driving down this road. This is in Parr in England. And I was doing about 30 miles an hour, maybe 25 miles an hour. And just as I got to this part, this is a very tight bend at the bottom. And I was just coming down the left-hand side as we drive in the UK. And I clearly heard this thought. It was kind of like a voice, but it wasn't an audible voice. It was just a very clear thought. Slow down. And I thought, well, that's weird. Well, maybe I should slow down. And I thought, that's just ridiculous. I'm going really slowly already. And then I thought, well, maybe I should, because you're supposed to, obey the voice of the Lord, right? If you think that's from God. So I slowed right down. And I got to about where this car is, maybe slightly, this one's parked. But I got to about here. And a car came shooting around the corner, just missed my front fender. Literally missed me by a foot, and he must have been doing 60 miles an hour. And I was thinking, if I hadn't slowed down, I would have had a head-on collision in that narrow corridor there of a road. And what was that? What was that intuition? What was that? Yeah, is that God? Right? I would say yes. I'd say definitely it was.
Is it dangerous to try to read that printing on the road when you're driving?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Here's another example. When I was a little boy, I was about 4 or 5 years old. I'd nominally thought I would become a Christian. My mum had said to me, if you want to go to heaven, you need to believe in Jesus or something. And I'd said, okay, I'll think about it. And she said, you've got to be good, So I was like, oh, okay.
Well, that's tough.
So I remember going to bed, and I remember thinking, well, if I knew what God's voice sounded like, then I would know whether he's a good guy or not, because you can tell by people's intonation whether they're gruff or whether they're kind or whether they're loving. And I thought, if I could only just hear what his voice sounded like. And I prayed, Lord, please help me to hear your voice, to know what it's like. And I went to sleep. And in the morning I woke up, and I had a really clear impression that I'd heard the voice of the Lord. I remember saying to my mum when she came in to wake me up, Mommy, God spoke to me. And she said, really, what did he say? And I was like, I can't remember, but I know that it was really loving. And she said, what was it like? And I said, it sounded like many waters. It sounded like a big waterfall or a huge river or something. But it was really all-embracing, and there was such a love and a grace there. And I knew that God was a good guy. Then later, I saw this passage, Ezekiel 43:2. And behold, the glory of God of Israel was coming from the east, and the sound of his coming was like the sound of many waters, and the earth shone with his glory. So where does that come from, right? Isn't that like God reaches in sometimes, just in a subtle way, and he says, I'm here. So, okay, my summary is, I think God clearly designed the universe and even the details of our lives to reveal himself to us. And he does this sometimes in subtle ways that don't remove our freedom of choice. You know, if God was so obvious, if every time there's an accident he reached out of the sky and made it all better, you wouldn't have free will. You'd have to believe in him. It was so obvious that he's there. But he wants to give us freedom of choice. He wants us to seek his face, and he wants us to find him. And the reason that we exist actually is because God chose us before the beginning of creation, and he wants to give us life, and life in abundance. And he wants to give us peace, love, joy, and gratefulness. Okay. Do you know that life? All right. That's the end of my talk. So that was the arguments for the existence of God from creation and design. And we're going to have time for questions. If anybody's got any questions, or anything I said wasn't sensible, or any challenges, please go for it. No?
If I can, I became a Christian when I was about 33 years old. And around that time, I had been married, working, and life just started to seem as if it was meaningless. It's like, why am I living? I'm not even living, I'm existing. So I just started to consider, is there a God out there? And I got down on my knees and I basically prayed a very simple prayer. God, if you're real, just reveal yourself to me. I've had other experiences prior to that, but that was the bigger moment when I actually did something about it. I went on my knees and I looked out the window and I said, Lord, reveal yourself to me. And nothing happened right away. It's like I'm still grappling with it. But at the same time, I was working with computers, just learning new technology, and as Phil just shared, I mean, there's just so much technology out there. There's just so much new knowledge that is actually showing the evidence that there is a God out there. So I started thinking of it from, I don't know if it's a scientific point of view, but a common sense. I'm a logical type of person, common sense type of person. Working with computers, I realized that computers have a code, zeros and ones. And it brought me back to the days when I took biology in school. I didn't do too well in biology, but we have that genetic code, you know, which the DNA, not that I knew anything about it, but I knew there's a code. And that was one time that I really struggled, and yet there was just such evidence that computers have a code that they have to work with, and there's accuracy. When I try to program something in, there's a result, and then it came down to the DNA. Basically, it's the same kind of program that we see in a computer. So just that kind of process just brought me into the knowledge that there must be a designer out there, because the DNA, if you look at the DNA, my gosh, it's that coding is just beyond comprehension. It's a million times more complicated than the computer code. that we're familiar with. So that got me thinking. It's like, wow, all these cells in the body, and then looking at a simple cell, and then with the new technology, with new science, there's really no such thing as a simple cell. There's no such thing as a simple cell. A simple cell, or what they call a simple cell, is very complicated. It's got the amino acids, and there's balance here, there's a balance there. And one time I watched a particular video that showed the complexity of it, and it's just mind-blowing. So, those were the steps that I personally took in coming to the conclusion that this is a design, just one of the many designs. So therefore, if it's a design, there must be a designer. So gradually, not to make the story a long story, but that's how I gradually came to understand that there is a God, and that was pretty much my turning point in a sense, a scientific point of view. Hope you can share something like that as well.
Totally.
Thanks, Ron.
Are you saying that if somebody came up to you and said, you walked in the computer room and all the code is there and all that, and someone said, oh, it just appeared one day. Is that what you're saying? You could see
yes.
You could see that it doesn't just appear.
There's a designer.
And how could that just appear?
That is correct. That is right. And those were the steps in my mind that I took to coming to, that conviction. Because if I'm going to believe in something, I want to make sure that if I believe in something or someone, that, there's some basis for it. My time is precious. I don't want to waste it. At the same time, I know I'm going to die someday. So I want to make sure that when I die, that all these things that I've heard about, that when you die you go to heaven, it's like, is there really a heaven? So one thought leads to another and another and another and another, and eventually reading Scripture, and Scripture puts it all together. That was my conviction.
So,
that makes sense to me.
oh, sorry, yeah.
But if a computer it just all of a sudden appeared one day and it's all coded up and everything just works.
Right.
That's impossible.
Yeah, and the DNA is that much more
And
impossible.
if you translate that into DNA, oh my goodness.
And you need the entire DNA before you get one replicating cell, right? So, you don't get evolution without a living cell. So you need at least the DNA to start that process, and that has to also come in a factory with ribosomes and everything else, right? So it's like the whole thing has to be there for it to work. Yep.
So the Bible's argument is that creation proves there was a creator. And the counter-argument is not necessarily you just don't have enough information. And yeah, it may be that a computer program won't generate birds, just exist. But we've heard the expression that if you give a room full of monkeys a bunch of typewriters and enough paper, eventually they will write the entire works of William Shakespeare, or perhaps something else, equally complex. I think the question is, how long would it take the monkeys? How much paper would they need? And as you begin to think about that, because it makes sense that the monkeys would eventually bang out the right keys by chance. But the amount of time that it would take is the part that gets staggering. Matter of fact, they'd probably be bigger numbers than the numbers we were looking at tonight.
Yeah.
And nobody here can pretend that we can understand those numbers.
Yeah.
They're bigger than us. You put a label on them. So back to the original question: Is there a God? Is there a creator, or did it just happen? That was the evidence, the apologetic argument that was presented, that one thing makes sense and the other thing is easy to fool somebody with, but doesn't really make any logical sense.
There was a question that I thought I would get asked, so I prepared an answer for it, which is, isn't this just the God of the gaps argument, right? When people so the idea of that, if you start explaining this must be God, right? An atheist often will say to you, well, you're just formulating a God of the gaps. Just because we don't know what happened at the Big Bang or how it happened, you're just plugging God in there, It's like saying, okay, back in the olden days we used to believe that God was the cause of thunder, but now we know he's not. So, science disproved God in that situation. So isn't this just another God of the gaps argument? And I wouldn't say, no, it's not. It's a completely different type of argument. Because let's say a car, right? And you look under the hood and you're looking in the engine and you see some low voltage wires going into a coil and some high voltage wires coming out, and you say, I really don't know how that happens. Maybe there's God in there and he's jumping the voltage up, right? But that would be fallacious, because you know that car was designed by an engineer who knew physics and electronics, and he designed it with a purpose. And so therefore you would approach that car with the thinking, well, I can work this out from a physics or a mathematical perspective, I can work it out. But we're not saying, how does the car work? Which we could do with the universe because it's an orderly universe. We're saying, where did the car come from and who designed it? It's a different question than how does it work. It's who built this car and who designed it. In this case, we're saying who built the universe, who designed it. So it's a kind of different question. It's not plugging God in the gaps. This is a fundamental. There must be a prime mover.